The Family Feud stage in Atlanta was live and filming when Darnell Washington walked off the contestant platform, crossed to the opposite side of the stage, and took the hand of a woman named Kayla, a woman who was not his wife, in front of his wife Tanya, 300 audience members, and every camera in the building. Tanya Washington stood at the podium for 11 full seconds without moving. Her hands were flat on the buzzer. Her face did not change. And Steve Harvey, who had been mid-sentence when it happened, went completely still. The way a person goes still when their brain cannot immediately process the scale of what their eyes are reporting. Then, Steve set his cue cards face down on the podium, looked at Tanya, looked at Darnell, and said 5 words. Nobody move. Nobody say anything. What happened next, in the 43 minutes that followed before producers finally called a full stop on the taping, would be the most watched sequence of footage in the 42-year history of Family Feud, and the moment that changed Tanya Washington's life in a direction she had not planned for, and would later describe as the best thing that ever happened to her. It was a Thursday in August, the kind of afternoon in Atlanta where the heat outside makes the air-conditioned studio feel like a different world entirely. The Washington family had driven from Savannah, Georgia, 4 hours on the highway, with the windows cracked because the back left window of their minivan had a seal that had gone bad 2 summers ago, and Darnell had not yet fixed it. Tanya, 37, sat in the passenger seat and watched the highway and thought about the survey answers she had studied from previous episodes she had watched online over 3 consecutive Sundays. She had prepared. That was what Tanya did. She prepared. She organized. She made sure everything was ready. She had her family's outfits pressed and laid out the night before. She had printed the directions to the studio even though she had also set the GPs, because she didn't trust any single system entirely. Tanya was a dental hygienist. She had been at the same practice in Savannah for 11 years. She coached her daughter Amara's soccer team on Saturday mornings. She organized the church food drive every November. She was the kind of woman who held things together with such consistency that the people around her sometimes forgot it required effort. Darnell was in the driver's seat. He had been quieter than usual for the drive. Tanya had noticed, but had said nothing. She had been noticing things about Darnell's quietness for approximately 7 months. She had chosen, each time, to say nothing. This was a choice she had made the way you make choices when you love someone and you are not yet ready to know the answer to the question you are afraid to ask. Their daughter Amara, 13, sat in the back seat with her earbuds in. Their son Jalen, 10, sat beside her and asked 4 separate times whether they would get to meet Steve Harvey in person. Tanya's younger sister Denise, 34, rode in the far back and contributed to the family's game strategy by announcing that she intended to buzz in on every question, whether she knew the answer or not. Kayla was not on the Washington family's application form. Kayla was not someone Tanya had ever met. Kayla had apparently been someone Darnell had been speaking to on his phone for 4 months, a fact that Tanya did not know, that the production team certainly did not know, and that Darnell had decided, in a calculation whose logic is impossible to understand from the outside, to resolve by bringing Kayla to the studio as a guest in the audience, and then, during a commercial break, going to sit with her in the front row, and then, when cameras resumed, walking her onto the stage itself. Nobody in that studio knew, not even Tanya, what Darnell had been planning to do that afternoon. Tanya and Darnell had been married for 15 years. They had met at a church picnic in Savannah when Tanya was 22 and Darnell was 24, and he had offered to carry the folding table she was struggling with across the park lawn, and she had said she had it, and he had said he could see that, and had walked alongside her anyway. That was the thing she had always loved about him, the way he showed up alongside her, Not ahead of her, not behind her. Alongside, they had built something solid. A house with a yard. 2 children who were thriving. A marriage that their friends held up as the example when other couples started having trouble. Tanya's mother called them the ones who made it look easy. But for 7 months, the alongside had been missing. She had noticed it the way you notice a sound that stops, not immediately, but gradually, in the accumulation of its absence. Darnell stopped reaching for her hand in the car. He started staying at the gym an hour later than usual on Tuesdays and Thursdays. He carried his phone differently, face down, always, where before he had left it anywhere without thinking. He became careful with it in a way that careful people do not need to be. Tanya had looked at the phone once. On a Saturday morning in March, when Darnell was in the shower and the phone was on the kitchen counter, and she had walked past it and stopped. She had stood there for 45 seconds with her hand not quite touching it, and then she had walked away. Because she was not yet ready to know. Because not knowing meant it was still possible that she was wrong, and she wanted, very much, to be wrong. She applied for Family Feud 6 weeks later, not because she believed a game show would fix anything, but because she wanted her family to do something together that felt like the before. Before the quietness, before the careful phone, before the 7 months of deciding not to ask the question. She wanted 2 days on the road with her kids and her sister, checking into a hotel that had a pool, playing a game on television, coming home with a story. She wanted to remember what the alongside felt like. She told Darnell she had applied. He said that sounded fun. And then she said something that no one was prepared for. 3 weeks before the taping, she told Amara in the kitchen while they were making dinner together that sometimes when things feel off in a family, the best thing to do is create a good memory and hold on to it. Amara had looked at her mother and said, with a directness that 13-year-olds have not yet learned to muffle, "Mama, why do you cry when you think I'm sleeping?" Tanya had turned back to the stove. She said, "I'm fine, baby, just tired." That was the lie. The kindest one she knew. The taping had been going well. The Washington family was energetic and quick, and the crowd had been with them from the first question. Steve was in his groove, the easy warmth he brings to families that are genuinely enjoying themselves, the banter that builds between host and contestants when everyone in the room is comfortable. Tanya had buzzed in twice with correct answers. Denise had buzzed in 3 times with answers that were not on the board and had been delighted by all of them. Jalen, watching from the front row, had at some point acquired a foam finger from a crew member and was waving it whenever his family scored. Then, the second commercial break began, and Darnell walked off the platform. He walked past the stage manager. He walked down the 3 steps to the audience floor. He walked to the second row, where a woman in a green dress was sitting, and he sat beside her. And when the camera operators began repositioning for the return from commercial, and the floor manager was counting down the seconds, Darnell stood up, took the woman's hand, and walked her up those 3 steps and onto the stage. He didn't say anything. He just stood there, on the Family Feud stage, holding another woman's hand, while his wife was 6 feet away at the contestant podium. Steve Harvey, already mic'd and walking back to his mark, saw it first. He stopped walking. His smile disappeared. He looked at Darnell. He looked at Kayla. He looked at Tanya. Tanya was looking at Darnell's hand. The studio fell completely silent. 300 people who had been buzzing with commercial break energy went quiet at the exact same moment. The floor manager, who had been counting down, stopped counting. The camera operators held position. A sound engineer later said that for approximately 11 seconds, the only sound in that building was the hum of the studio lighting grid. Steve said, "Nobody move. Nobody say anything." His voice was not loud. It was very low and very certain, the kind of voice that does not need volume. He walked to the center of the stage. He stood between Tanya and Darnell, equidistant. He looked at Darnell for a long moment. Darnell said something that the microphones didn't catch. Steve held up one hand. He looked at Tanya. Tanya's hands were still flat on the buzzer. She had not moved. She was looking at Steve, not at Darnell. Later in an interview, she said she had looked at Steve because he was the only person in the room who seemed to know what to do next, and she needed to look at something that was steady. "Tanya," Steve said, "I need you to know something right now, before we take another step. The strength you are showing at this moment, the way you are standing at that podium, that is not weakness. That is the most dignified thing I have seen on this stage in 39 years. The audience went quiet in a way it hadn't all episode. "Stop everything," Steve said, turning to his producers. "We are stopping this game. This has never happened in the 42-year history of this show, and it will not happen without a response." The producer in the wings took a step forward. Steve looked at her and shook his head once. She stopped. Steve turned to Darnell. He stood directly in front of him. He did not raise his voice. "I'm going to ask you to leave the stage," Steve said. "Not with anger, not with disrespect, but I need you to understand that this is not something I'm going to film around. You took a woman's hand in front of your wife, in front of your children, in front of 300 people and every camera in this building. And I will not continue until that woman," he turned and looked at Tanya, "receives the response she deserves from this room." Darnell left the stage. Kayla followed without speaking. The room held its breath. Steve walked to Tanya. He stood beside her at the podium. He looked at her face, still controlled, still steady, the way a person holds themselves when the alternative is collapsing in a room full of strangers. He said, "Let me tell you something, and I need you to hear it from somewhere real, not from television." He paused. "I have been the person on the wrong side of a marriage. I have been the one who wasn't what someone needed me to be. And I know what it costs the person standing where you are standing. I know what it costs to be steady when everything underneath you has just shifted. I know it because the people I hurt had to find that same steadiness, and I have spent a long time understanding what it required of them." He stopped. "Because 15 years ago, in a different way, in a different room, I was the person who put someone in the position you are in right now. And I am sorry I say that to you, because I can never say it to them in this way." The room was absolutely silent. Hardened television professionals were looking at the floor. "No network approval," Steve said to the cameras. "This is me, Steve Harvey. What I'm about to do is off the record from the format, but completely on the record from who I am." He reached into his jacket and took out his phone. He called his attorney's office on speaker. He told them to initiate paperwork for a full legal consultation and family law advisory session for Tanya Washington. Funded entirely and immediately with the best family attorney in the state of Georgia. He told them to have someone contact Tanya directly within 24 hours. He confirmed it on the call while 300 people listened. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to the audience. He turned to the cameras. "I want to say something to every person watching at home. Dignity is not something that gets taken from you when someone does you wrong. Dignity is what you carry when you choose how to respond." And Tanya Washington, standing at that podium, did not flinch. She did not collapse. She did not perform her pain for this room. She stood there with her hands on that buzzer, because she is a woman who finishes what she starts, and I am going to make sure that the chapter she starts today is the best one she has ever written. He held up his hand. There was more. He announced that Tanya's family would receive not only the full game prize, but a personal grant from his foundation of $25,000, designated for whatever Tanya decided her next step required. Legal fees, relocation, her children's stability fund, or all three. He said the grant carried one condition: it could only be used by Tanya, for Tanya's and her children's benefit, no one else's. Then he turned to the competing family, the Perkinsons, from Charlotte, who had been standing at their podium in complete silence for 11 minutes, watching everything unfold. Their mother, Gloria Perkinson, had her hand pressed over her heart. When Steve looked at them, Gloria said, "We forfeit our prize. Give it all to her." The audience erupted. Steve held up his hand again to quiet the room. He looked at Gloria. He said, "That is the kindest thing I have witnessed on this stage this year." He then announced that both families would receive the full prize. He would cover the Perkinson family's winnings personally, out of his own pocket, so that Gloria's generosity would not cost her family a single dollar. When the episode, in its edited form, with legal clearances, aired 8 weeks later, it generated 204 million views in the first 72 hours. Every major news network covered it. The hashtag #SheDidn'tFlinch trended globally for 11 days. Tanya Washington appeared on 3 national morning programs. She answered every question the same way: steady, clear, without performance. 3 months after the taping, Tanya filed for divorce. Her attorney, retained through Steve's referral, negotiated a settlement that secured the family home, primary custody of Amara and Jalen, and a financial arrangement that her attorney described, in a court filing, as fully protective of the children's long-term stability. Amara, 13, asked her mother one question the week the papers were filed: "Are we going to be okay?" Tanya said, "We are going to be better than okay." Jalen said he still wanted to know if he could meet Steve Harvey. A year after the taping, Steve Harvey and Tanya Washington met again at a luncheon for the foundation Steve had established in the aftermath of the episode, the Stand at the Podium Foundation. Named after the image of Tanya's hands flat on that buzzer, and dedicated to providing legal and financial support to women navigating divorce with dependent children. In its first year, the foundation had distributed over $2 million to families in 31 states. Tanya spoke at the luncheon. She said 3 things. She said that dignity was not something Darnell took from her that day on the stage. She said it was something she discovered she had always owned, and she said that the best decision she ever made was applying for Family Feud because she wanted to remember what the alongside felt like. Because that application led her to the exact moment she needed, and the moment led her to the life she actually deserved. 5 years later, Tanya Washington manages a community legal clinic in Savannah that serves women in family crisis situations. She coaches Jalen's basketball team on Saturday mornings now. Amara is in her 2nd year of college, studying communications. She calls her mother every Sunday. Tanya keeps a photograph from the taping on her office desk. Not the moment Darnell walked off the stage. The moment after. The moment Steve Harvey stood beside her at the podium, and the audience was completely still, and she was standing with her hands flat on the buzzer, looking straight ahead, not flinching, not performing, not breaking. She keeps it there because she says it reminds her of the truest thing about herself. Not what happened to her, who she was while it was happening. Have you ever stayed when someone expected you to fall? Have you ever found your backbone in a moment you didn't choose? Share your story in the comments below. If this moment moved you, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that your dignity is not something anyone can take from you. It is something only you can choose to claim. And ring that notification bell for more moments that prove that the way you stand in your hardest moment is the truest thing anyone will ever know about you.